Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about heroes once again, directly, because a lot of people in the comments have been asking me to do another video like that, even though I tried to touch on that subject matter with my other videos as well. And I do indeed like doing these kinds of videos, because it ties in a lot of the different subject matter that I touch on. First, I can look at these quote-unquote progressive people, see how they think, show how it is not connected with the idea of a hero. I can easily use the subject matter that I normally deal with, which is comics, and science fiction and fantasy more generally. It's a great way to better refine the idea of hero and villain so that it can be put down on a page better, and it helps me condense my own thoughts on those subjects so that I can write a better story in that vein. And today I'm going to talk more directly about how something I'm always referring to, which is the lack of an idea of a coherent human nature, which the quote-unquote progressive crowd tries to destroy. When you get rid of that idea of a fixed human nature, it destroys the idea of a true hero. However, mentioning my own attempts to try to put a good story down on a page, I just want to let everyone know that my next campaign will be opening in a few weeks. Right now, what is up is the early bird sign-up page, and you can go over there and leave your email address if you wish to be informed when the project goes live in a couple of weeks. And if you do that, by clicking on the link in the description or on the pinned comment and leaving your email address, you will get a free exclusive pinup poster if you order anything from the campaign, and that is the only way that you will be able to get that poster. And as I said, it's only open for the next few weeks, so you might want to jump on that right away. This new book is an 82-page spectacular which contains 4 different stories. The first 3 main stories are between 22 to 26 pages, which is the regular length for a normal comic book. The first one is the Valiant Heroes #1. It is concentrating once again on the team of Thomas Valiant, but with less of a focus on Thomas Valiant himself, more upon the other members of the team. And the art for that is being handled by Martin Stevenson. The second one is a Kit Fox story. Now, this is a character which was in Thomas Valiant #1, and I never intended this character to be a main character, but Renzo just loved writing this character, drawing this character so much that he asked me to redeem this character, and so that's what we're doing within this story. It's called The Redemption of Kit Fox. The third story is being handled by Mike Gustovich. He is an old Marvel and DC hand. It is called The Rampaging Thor. And again, this character, my character of Thor, was introduced in Thomas Valiant #1. But he's more of a villain than a hero, because it always baffled me why and how Marvel turned Thor into a hero. Historically, he's not a hero. He's more of a villain. Unless, of course, you're a rampaging Viking. So this story is sort of like one of the old Marvel stories for Thor, because he has a dual identity, but this is more of a Jekyll and Hyde situation. And there's also an 8-page backup story, which is another story that is dealing with secondary characters from this Thomas Valiant universe. It is being handled by Light Comic Studios, which is a manga studio. And the reason why I'm breaking it down like this is because A, it allows me to move faster, getting more teams to work on the same project at once so we can finish faster. But at the same time, those first 3 main stories, since they are the size of a normal comic book, the plan is to offer those as floppies as well, so that for those people who can't spend a lot of money on a 82-page graphic novel and you just want to pick up one of these stories as a floppy, costing you about the same as you would pay for a Marvel or DC comic, although you'll have to pay for the shipping, that will be available to you as well. Although the graphic novel will have exclusively that 8-page story, and those floppies will have, hopefully, if I get my act in gear, some fun little bits, which are not necessary for the story, but just fun things that will be available only in those floppies. So again, the link for the early bird sign-up page is in the description, and it is in the pinned comment at the top. You just have to click on it and leave your email address. It will put you on a list, and you will be notified when my campaign goes live, and this is the only way you will be able to get that exclusive pinup poster for this campaign if you order something. Anyways, back to my topic. So I'm going to start off in a weird place. I'm going to describe to you something which happened to me while I was in high school. Because in high school, I had a politics class. It was an elective. You didn't have to take it. I took it for 2 years. We learned about different kinds of politics, the origins of politics, and different politics around the world. And we had a separate class for civics, which also doubled as a law class. And yes, I took that as well. And yes, I realized people are going to put in the comments, I went to a very strange high school as compared to what exists today. At the same time, I was taking history. I loved history. And this was at a time when we were still studying great men, great event history. And this question emerged in my mind after a while. How in the world would you, in the modern age, create a dictatorship that was actually stable. Because again, I'm studying politics, I'm studying history, and I'm thinking to myself, it was stable in the past. Why can't we make it stable now? What would it look like? Because most of the attempted dictatorships of the last, certainly, century were utter failures, because when you attempt to take away people's choices, they're going to rebel. And it really didn't take me very long to answer that question for myself, and my answer was, well, the thing is that if you want to become a dictator in this way, you don't take away people's choices, you give them so many choices that their choices simply don't matter. Because they either get stunned with the amount of choices that they can make, that they simply don't make any choice, or you give them so many choices that, again, when they make a choice, it is very rare that they're going to make one that actually has some impact. And again, it didn't take me very long to realize why I came up with that very quick answer for how to make a dictatorship that would actually last in our present society. It was because that's the world we live in right now. You and I and most people, certainly in the Western world, are bombarded by so many choices that your choices no longer matter. And what I would say is the core of how we got here, certainly there may be other ways of thinking about this, but I think this is the central reason. The core is that we got rid of any idea of a stable human nature. And the way that this was done was in very simple tactics. The way that it would be expressed, as most people would probably be familiar with it today, is your teachers telling you things like, you can do anything, you can be anything. I'm sorry, no you can't. You cannot do anything, you cannot be anything. You are a human being. As a human being, you have a fixed human nature. That fixed human nature limits your ability to do things, and limits your ability as to who you will be and what you can do. I'm not a fish. I can't live underwater. I'm not a bird. I can't fly under my own power. I'm a human being. I have a limited capacity for understanding. I can't understand fully and completely something like infinity. And in addition to that, I have individual limitations as well. I'm not smart enough to become a rocket scientist. I look like a gangly Scotsman, so only certain forms of physical activity are really in my wheelhouse. All these sorts of things. And before I move on, I just want to point out there is an example, a beautiful example of this within comics, and it is going to be coming to your television screen pretty quickly. It is Ironheart. It is the new person of color female Iron Man. What was her origin point in the story? Well, there was a teacher telling her, you can do anything. And she said to her teacher, no, you have to oppress me. Tell me I can't do something. Tell me what I can't be, and then I'm going to fight against that. And so she just came up with, oh, you can't be Tony Stark. And then she said, I'm going to be Tony Stark. And the playing out of this scene, and the origin really of this scene, which leads to this ridiculous progressive story, is that exact notion that, yeah, you can be anything. See, at the same time, she wants to rebel at this old idea that there are things that she can't do, which is the idea of a fixed human nature. And that's really what this entire storyline of Ironheart is built around. But anyway, the reason why there are certain things that you cannot do, again, is because you have a fixed human nature. That is the nature of being a human being. This goes back all the way, at the very least, to the idea of Plato and the forms. Or if you go through Aristotle, it'll be the idea of being a human being. It's basically a form, but in his own words, not in Plato's words. And if you wanted to give it a name, if you're a spiritual person, the name for that is a soul. You have a soul, that is your form. You don't have to give it that name, but a lot of people do give it that name. And it's a fixed thing that all human beings share. And one of the ways of looking at this form of a human being is to look at it in the terms of potentiality and actuality. So your form, your soul, is built up of all the things that you can potentially be. Now, that does not include all things, just all the things that you can potentially be, that you can, through some means, bring into actuality in your life. And the point being, for these quote-unquote progressives, why their choices mean nothing is because in their destruction of the idea of a fixed human nature, they think they can potentially become anything and then spend their time trying to make actuality what they think is their potential, but since it's not in their potential, they're just wasting their time. The examples of this, certainly within the current society, is the idea that you can define what your age is, no matter how long you've been alive. I'm sorry, that's not part of your potential. You can't do that. Or you can define yourself by your feelings, what species you are. So if you think you're a dog, you're a dog. No, you can't. That's not your potential. You can't do that. And don't even get me started on the whole idea of gender. Gender is applied to words, not to people. If you think that you can apply gender to people, you just swallowed the old feminist line that they made up. I think it was about in the 70s where they came up with this idea of applying gender to people. And if you use that language and have a discussion about it, it's like trying to have a discussion of how to create the perfect story with only triangles. It's ridiculous because it makes no sense. And again, why? Because it's not in the potential of these things to be something else. Go back to the first law of logic. A thing is what it is. And here's where we get into the reason why these quote-unquote progressive people think this. It all has to do with that moniker that I give them and that they call themselves, which is progressive. It's all about progression. Progression of what? Progression of society. Progression towards what? Progression towards a idealistic society, a utopia, or at the very least, a Star Trek-like future. And I'm sorry, even though I was a big fan of Star Trek when I was younger, the idea of that society is ridiculous. I really liked that episode of, I think it was Deep Space Nine, where, who was it, Quark was trying to tell his nephew who wanted to become a Starfleet officer, he said, you see these humans all around us? They think they're so superior. They think they have advanced to the point where they've evolved enough that they no longer are hateful or nasty or greedy or any of those things. But they haven't. You take away all of their luxuries and they become as nasty as any Boolean, as any Klingon, as any Romulan. Whoever wrote those lines knew exactly what he was talking about. The future is going to look more like Aliens than Star Trek. And why? Because we're human beings. We're the same. I can switch out me with someone from the Stone Age. We're going to have the same human nature. But you see, these progressive people, they believe that they can get into this utopian or utopian-like future. Now, how do they do that? Well, the entire ideological mindset of how they do that is as follows. They see this utopia. They see that it is a round hole. The only problem is that they know that human beings are a square peg. So how do you fit a square peg into a round hole? Well, very easily. You take that square peg and you whittle it down until it is round. Then it can fit into the hole. But the thing is that how do you whittle these people down? Well, you do it first of all through social forces. You change these people, and the only way that you can change them into whatever it is you want to fit into this hole, because by the way, that hole is constantly changing how exactly it fits because their idea of utopia constantly changes, then there can be no thing which is fixed within the nature of a human being that you cannot change in order to fit into this hole. I would say probably the more apt way of describing it is that they're not just trying to take humanity and change it into a round peg, they're trying to take it and make it into such a squishy substance that it can just be shoved in this hole or any other hole that they come up with. And again, it all comes from their end point of thinking, yes, this utopia is possible. But again, if you take it to its logical conclusion, the only way this utopia or utopian-like society is possible is if you can change mankind, the entire species, into something else which it is currently not, so that it can fit into that society. Therefore, a human nature gets in the way of that. Any idea of a fixed human nature gets in the way of that. You must get rid of it. And one other point to bring up right here is that, yes, this is all done in a societal manner. The individual has no place in any of this. It's all you as a part of humanity. This is probably why a lot of you are looking around you going, why do I feel like my society has suddenly turned into this bizarre social experiment? You feel that way because that's exactly what's going on. These progressive people are experimenting using society itself to try to change humanity into something that it is currently not. The same thing happened with the USSR, where they were trying to teach plants to grow in a socialist manner, which resulted in mass famine, or their experimentations like Cannibal Island, where they just abandoned people on basically a rock and wanted to see what kind of utopian society that they were going to build, which I'm sure you probably figured out by now, by what we now call the island, how that one worked out. But the important point is, individuals don't matter. It's just the society. Although certainly the way that they get all of this to work is to convince people, these useful idiots, these foot soldiers that believe in progressivism, that this society that they're going to build for them is one wherein they will be allowed to indulge in anything they want to do, to be selfish in any way possible, which again goes right back to the point of you can do anything. You can be anything. You have no limitations on you whatsoever, not even the limitations of being a human. Therefore, you can choose to do or be anything. Now let's take a different tack for a second and see how this impacts storytelling. Because, as I said, I talk mostly about comics, which is a combination of science fiction and fantasy. Wouldn't you think that science fiction and fantasy stories would want to push that limitation of human nature, take some element and add it to it or take it away from it? Isn't that the whole point of science fiction and fantasy? Well, yes and no. The whole point of these kinds of stories is to add something that is not there within human nature, but you're also at the same time writing for an audience. So you have to find a way to connect to that audience. And the way, traditionally, that you do so is connecting to them through their humanity. That is to say, you're adding this thing or you're subtracting this thing from this society, from this person, from this existence, in order to highlight the things that you know about in your own existence that then connect you with the story and the characters. That's the only way that your audience is going to relate to the story to begin with. And here's where I bring up something else that I talk about a lot. It's the fact that I go back to these ancient ideas of how to tell a story, and the ideas that that kind of storytelling itself is based upon. And I go back to those ideas because that's what our entire civilization is built upon. All of the systems whereby you live, whether they be the law court system or the monetary system or how much we trust each other, they're all based upon these ancient ideas. Now, there have been some that have slipped in over the last couple of 100 years that have countered those ancient ideas, but they've done nothing but disrupt our societies and our civilizations to the point of driving them to where we are right now, which is the barbarians at the gates of civilization. By the way, a lot of people accuse me of trying to take this quote-unquote progressive movement and make it some conspiracy theory monolith that they're all working together in unison and they're all trying to overthrow society. No, they're a bunch of selfish individuals, a bunch of useful idiots that are basically the barbarians at the gate of civilization. But the point being that I believe that all of that stuff, whether it be within the way that we create our governments, the way that we interact with each other, or the way we tell stories, is based upon those ancient notions still, because those ancient notions are built upon what is true. It considers the truth of our existence, and taking that into account builds up what we see around us. But at the same time, even if you don't believe that it is based upon something true, at the very least, at the absolute minimum, it is the best way to get the civilization that we see around us today. If you just want to think in terms of utility, well, those ancient ideas have competed in the marketplace of ideas over the millennia and have come out on top time and time and time again. Because there have been many challengers, and they've put them down every time. So even if you don't think it's based upon the truth, you can certainly see how it's based upon utility. And that's exactly the way that stories in their ancient form still exist today. We, as a European culture, have encountered different forms of storytelling over the millennia, but the rational form of storytelling that Aristotle described in his very logical way put them down over and over and over again and said, no, this way actually works better. We're going to keep it this way. And people just living their ordinary lives looked at this competition and said, yeah, that one works. I'm going with that. And part of those ancient ideas about storytelling is that a story is, at its base, a representation, a representation of reality. And you use that reality, specifically the reality of being a human being, so that you, the human being of the writer, can connect with the human beings that are your audience through the human beings that you put down as characters on a page. Why? Because you represent the reality of the situation, which is that all human beings have a fixed human nature that you can connect to and tell your story through. So again, if you're telling a science fiction and fantasy story, that's fine. If you're adding or subtracting something to human nature or the human existence in that story, that's fine as well. But the connecting point between the storyteller and the audience is through the reality of their human nature. And this is exactly the thing that they have discarded, especially within current storytelling. So let's look at a few examples of how this actually plays out and what they're doing in order to try to present what looks like a story still without using these devices. One of the things that Marvel Comics is doing, and trust me, I've listened to enough of their podcasts and listened to them talk about what kind of people that they want, what kind of writers that they're trying to get, who they're trying to draw in, how you get to work for Marvel as a writer. And if you want examples of that, just go into my back catalog. There are dozens of videos about this. What they're looking for is someone with what they call a unique perspective. This is the exact opposite of trying to connect with someone through a shared human nature. They don't believe, as quote-unquote progressives, that people have a fixed human nature or a shared human nature that is built upon that fixed human nature. Therefore, the only thing that you can present to your audience is something new. Since your audience really can't have any foothold on knowledge through human existence, you simply have to continually present them with a new perspective because it is through the relative perspective of each separate individual that you can then expand your knowledge by adding their life experiences or understandings of their life experiences to your own life experience and try to build up some kind of knowledge that way. This is exactly what they mean by saying over and over again that they want unique voices. I always bring up this example. I listened to Sana Amanat, who was the second in command at Marvel Comics at the time of the podcast, offer a job to a 17-year-old girl who had never written anything before in her life. She said, "Do you want to come work for Marvel?" Why? Because this girl was a Native American environmentalist activist. And she didn't have one of those. That's a unique perspective. And so she said, "Hey, do you want to come work for Marvel?" Because again, the whole point of the storytelling is simply to present the audience with something new, a new perspective. Which again, I think of as a ridiculous notion, but at the very least, you don't have to believe what I believe. You can just easily see how in a utilitarian manner that makes no sense. Put into the ring the competing ideas of, I'm going to build up my knowledge by interacting and adding one person at a time, their life experience to my life experience, and set that up as a rhetorical device used to tell stories with, I'm going to connect to what is the nature of every human being that has ever existed. I'm going to tap into that, and I'm going to funnel through that everything that you need to know concerning this story. You see, as those two different forms of storytelling get into the ring together, which one is going to crush the other. And more specifically, what kind of stories do you get when you hire these people with unique voices? Well, all you get is these specific writers telling stories that are based upon themselves and their own experience. That's all they're doing because that's all they're hired to do. They are supposed to present the unique perspective that they have as a story. That unique perspective does not come through an understanding of human nature. It comes through an exploration of their own selves and identity, basically through the exploration of their own selfishness. And then you get stories that are just an author putting themselves down on the page. And so you get people like Kelly Sue DeConnick, who originally created the new Captain Marvel. She literally said in an interview she took Chuck Yeager and basically crammed him into a woman's suit, and that's how she made the character, but then explored the character through her own experiences as an army brat. Or you take Miss Marvel, which was literally created by the admission of Sana Amanat herself as a little Sana Amanat to present to all the little Sana Amanats out there in the world. Or you get people like Sina Grace, just writing the new flaming alphabet person Iceman as himself, because that's what he is. Or Marika Tamaki writing I Am Not Starfire, and I'll just put a visual up there in the background to show you how that character is a copy of her. Or the one that I just presented in my last week's video, where you had Megan Fitzmartin explaining how she was using the old Young Justice Wonder Girl as a way to express her own feelings and her own lived experiences, thinking that presenting this angry young girl who's trying to take revenge on the world is something new. Now, I started off by saying I'm going to talk about heroes. How does this all connect to heroes? Well, here's the thing. What are heroes in their traditional sense? Heroes in their traditional sense are paragons of virtue, and that virtue depends upon right reason. Now, go back to what I said near the first of this video. If you have a fixed human nature and you're describing it from potentiality and actuality, how do you take that potentiality of your human nature and then translate it into actuality? Well, the only way that you can do that is through virtue. And of course, that virtue is built upon right reason. That is to say, reason in accord with reality. In order to build up that virtue, in order for you to take that potential and make it real, in order for you to use those virtues, first you have to recognize the reality around you. And one of those realities that you have to recognize around you is the fact that you're a human being and you're part of the human race and you have a fixed human nature that determines what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot become, what the ends of the fulfillment and the good life of what you're trying to do, which is what every human being is going to gear themselves towards, why that endpoint is set by the beginning point of your fixed human nature. And again, how do you do this? What is the power by which you translate potentiality into actuality? It is virtue. Nothing other than virtue. That is one of the definitions of virtue itself. It is the power of a human being to accomplish their ends. And again, as I just said, what are those ends? What am I talking about when I say ends? The ends that are set by your human nature to say, this is how you will be fulfilled. You will be fulfilled by taking that potentiality and making it into a reality. And the only way that you can do that is by first recognizing what you can potentially be, then funneling that potential through the virtues into reality. And I want to go down the Aristotelian scale of what this actually means within his writings, especially in his books about ethics, and how that connects to his books about storytelling. First off, you'll notice that when he talks about this kind of virtuous life, he understands that the human nature is that reason is supposed to be the master and your passions are supposed to be the servant of the reason. Now, first of all, he and the society that he lived in, just like the Christians after him, acknowledged that there was something within a human being that was trying to usurp this natural rule of the reason over the passions. For Christians, it would be the idea of the fall of man. That's where that comes from. For the Greeks, they had different mythological stories to explain this exact thing. the fall from the golden age into the age where they were. And secondly, I'll have to note that again, for the last couple of 100 years at least, this is a notion which the thinkers that have been influential have been trying to destroy. Once again, leading up to this destruction of the idea of any human nature. You had people like Hobbes and Locke saying that no, the passions are actually supposed to be in control, and the reason, yes, it exists, but it only exists as a servant of the passions in order for the passions to get what they want more efficiently. Or you go into someone like Nietzsche, who again completely destroys the idea of a real fixed human nature, especially when it comes to the implementation of one of his central ideas, which is dynamism, which is basically the will to power without virtue. But again, all of those modern thinkers just lead up to what we have right now, which is utter chaos with these barbarians at the gates of civilization. If you go back to what our civilization is built upon, those ideas, is that yes, your human nature is that your reason should be in control and your passion should be the servant of the reason. But there is something within you which is trying to change that, trying to usurp that, trying to put your passions over top of your reason. And it is virtue, first of all, that will save us from this happening. And this is part of the reason why, again, when I talk about virtue, it always backs up into right reason. Reason comes first. And so within his works, especially within his works of storytelling, he talks about a hero in a more definitive term, which is to say a paragon of virtue. It is someone who does these virtuous things. He has been trained up in the habit of actually being virtuous and then becomes someone which is a paragon of virtue. But at the same time, he still needs to struggle in order to maintain that virtue. Then he talks about the everyman. He talks about that within storytelling and within his ethics as well. He talks about how there are people which are slightly above the everyman, which have some counterbalance in their life, something which urges them over and over again and actually inclines them over and over again to do things which are contrary to the rational, virtuous thing to do, but they still do the virtuous thing. For them, that struggle is very hard. Those people are called the continent. And then you have the people who are underneath the everyman, those people who are incontinent. That is to say, those people who submit themselves to their passion. They, every once in a while, try to cling to that rational virtue in their lives and become better people, but they are ultimately overcome by their passions because they're just not trained up enough in their own lives through their own choices to actually choosing and doing the virtuous thing. Now, before I get on to the last kind of person that he describes, I want to talk about this struggle just for a minute. This struggle that people have to go through in order to be virtuous, even if you are a hero. Now, as I said, I'm always talking about comics. And the thing is, there are easy characters that I can always grab at as examples of these things that I'm talking about, examples as heroes. Now, why in the world can I easily grab at those characters? Because there have been hundreds, and I would say thousands of characters within just the main universes themselves. But the characters that everybody relates to, the characters that everybody remembers, are the characters that A, actually follow this form of storytelling, this form of acting, and at the same time B, struggle with this nature to become heroes and to maintain themselves as heroes. This is why everybody knows the name of Clark Kent as Superman. This is why everybody in our society knows about Batman. This is why people will be able to tell you the very basics of the story of Spider-Man. This is why people have some notion of characters like the Hulk. Because these characters follow that storytelling pattern, that action pattern, and that struggle. They have what is called a pathos. This pathos is the thing which allows them to continue that struggle against what is constantly trying to drag them down away from the virtuous actions that makes them heroes. It's that sting of loss, that sting of pain, where Bruce Wayne continues to be Batman. Why? Because he always remembers the murder of his parents. Or Clark Kent, being first educated as a child in the virtuous ways of acting, which is exactly the way Aristotle describes it, and then finding that pathos that matures him into the person who realizes that he is the only one left of his kind, that hardens that position that allows him to be the ultimate paragon of virtue. Or Peter Parker being one of those people who rebelled against those virtues, which then led to the death of his father figure, which is Uncle Ben, which became the pathos, the thing that he went back to time and time again in order to spur him on to be a hero. All of these stories and many more are built upon this exact thing which I have been describing over and over again throughout this video and other videos. That struggle, that pathos is what is necessary. And within these current stories, quite literally, there was a podcast I covered from Marvel where they talked about Sana Amanat, the second in command once again at Marvel, the vice president of content and character development at that time, telling an old writer that no, you see, the way we make these new characters is deliberately without a pathos. They don't need that pain. They don't need that moment of, I'm going to become a hero. Why? Because, again, they're exempting themselves wholeheartedly from the idea of this entire system, which is built upon the idea of a fixed human nature. And that's partly why none of these characters mean anything to the people who used to be deep fans of these characters, because they no longer are those virtuous people who are using that moment of pathos in order to stay the heroes that they were. They're no longer heroes at all. I think the best example of this would be One More Day, which is a Spider-Man story, which is where Peter Parker literally gave up his wife in order to have just a little more time with his very old aunt. He made literally a deal with the devil to do that, to give up the person that he swore, gave an oath in his vows of marriage that he would cherish above all other people. This is not the act of a hero. This destroys the entire character. This is the act of someone who is certainly, at the very least, incontinent. And this is why, when we, as older fans, look at these characters now, we see nothing but villains, because that's exactly what they are. They follow this pattern that Aristotle describes when he talks about the person that disregards virtue altogether. Those people who refuse to even try to do what is ethically virtuous, because they don't think that the virtues like justice and temperance and fortitude have any value whatsoever. These people he calls evil. They are driven, as he says, by a desire for domination and luxury. They have a single-minded pursuit of this goal of domination and luxury, but in the end, because it's not part of their potentiality to exist in this way, they are ultimately dissatisfied with their existence, and that dissatisfaction just expresses itself in self-hatred. And I don't think I can find a better description of what quote-unquote progressive people are right now than that. Nor can I find a better example of how to define a villain. And why? Where does this all come from? Well, once again, as I began, it comes from these people denying their own human nature, or that any human nature exists at all. Because they want to get to this utopia, because that's their end point, they have to destroy any idea of a fixed human nature within their own minds, within their own existence, within their actions, and so it leads them to this death spiral of hatred of themselves, which they then try to get rid of in their own lives by taking it out on others. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, the early bird sign-up page for my new campaign is up. The link for it is in the description and on the pinned comment. If you want to get that free, exclusive pinup poster, when you order something from this campaign, you must sign up early, and that page will only be up for the next couple of weeks. So you might want to jump on that right away. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.